Okay, yeah, that's better. All right, excellent. So thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the last few days here at the Australian Space Research Conference. I suppose with coming on the last day to give my talk, I could reflect a little bit on some of the really interesting areas that have certainly been covered and how perhaps they might also pertain to Australia eventually establishing an Australian astronaut corps, as it were. I suppose in approaching this topic, I'd like to reflect a little bit on how I've spoken or had contact with Dr. Paul Scully-Power and Andy Thomas, the two Australians that have been to space. There was one other Australian that was trained as an astronaut in 1967 that actually was a scientist that, of the name of P.K. Chapman, which many Australians don't know. I did reach out and email him, but unfortunately didn't hear back from him. But
he doesn't reply.
Yeah, but I tell you what, it's certainly inspirational to go through the training that you need to be an astronaut, to get as far as he did was certainly amazing. So take nothing away from P.K. Chapman as being a third Australian that could rightfully be claimed to have been trained as an astronaut. So I suppose, why am I here? Well, I'm a science teacher. I've been a science teacher for 10 years. My original degree was in geophysics, which I did in Macquarie University. And I did my degree originally in Macquarie University in a time when we had barely discovered exoplanets. So in the mid-90s, we were only just discovering our first exoplanets. I really enjoyed Earth science. My own journey in terms of Earth science was actually somehow influenced by an astronaut. I originally studied oceanography at the Australian Defence Force Academy, and with doing that, I was mindful that Dr. Paul Scully-Power had actually done oceanography, and so that actually influenced my decision to study that. And that was something that I was definitely really interested in. So this is a terrific photo actually taken over Western Australia by an astronaut. That's obviously has managed to capture that beautiful coastline there of Western Australia. I thought I'd throw this one just in case we had Tommy Clark in the room. Of course, we thought a nice reference to Western Australia couldn't go amiss. But this is what I'd really like to one day see. I'd really like to see an Australian wearing a suit, but actually with an Australian flag, and not having to necessarily give up their citizenship to go to another country. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about issues such as brain drain. I'm going to talk about things obviously that boost to STEM, which have been mentioned previously, in terms of being able to excite kids and get kids really engaged. Nothing is going to get kids more engaged than actually showing them that that they can actually reach this, they can actually achieve this. So as far as this process, I do want to mention that I did get emails back from Dr. Paul Scully-Power and Andy Thomas, and I'll be sort of reading parts of those that correspondence out to you, just to sort of give you an idea of obviously their opinions on whether we should or should not establish an Australian Astronaut Corps. And I believe that the time for this type of talk is appropriate because it's the new agency. It's only been 11 weeks. And so I'm hoping that we'll start to, over the coming years, be able to get more and more people interested in actually pushing them. So, as far as the Australians, here they are here. So we've got Dr. Andy Thomas on the left-hand side and Dr. Paul Scully-Power. Now, Andy Thomas is a really interesting individual. He's actually been to the space station Mir. He spent around 177 days, I believe, in space. So he certainly has no inexperienced astronaut. He was actually one of the deputies of the astronaut corps in the US. Of course, he did move to the US in order to be able to become an astronaut and took up US citizenship. Dr. Paul Scully-Power on the right-hand side was involved a bit before Andy was in the 80s. Went up on the space shuttle and worked as a mission specialist. His oceanography connection came in because he used to work for the US Navy. And when I met Dr. Paul Scully-Power when he was working as the Chief Technology Officer of Tenix Defence, I'll never ever forget him saying, James, the thing about space is that really to appreciate it, you've got to be there at least a week. So here is me having a conversation with one of my idols, and he was telling me about what it was like to spend a week in space, and not just the fact that he said, there's going to be a number of suborbital flights that are going to happen. There's going to be certainly lots and lots of people talking about commercial space flight, but it's not the same thing as being trained as an astronaut and actually doing science up on an international space station or a similar structure. And so I suppose that really comes to my point of defining an astronaut. So I'm defining an astronaut as being professionally trained orbital worker. I'm not referring to space tourists, and I'm not referring to suborbital space flights. I'm talking about people that will actually be trained to go up to an international space station or cislunar space station or eventual lunar village, potentially if that happens from the European Space Agency's planning. And hopefully by defining that, we can perhaps realise that yes, you may be able to go into space, but I'm talking about really sort of an area where we want to actually encourage our best engineers, scientists, and our best and brightest to go and become professional astronauts as opposed to just space tourists. So I really want to draw that distinction quite early in my talk. Okay, so there's been a lot, obviously, in the media with regards to Australia and astronauts, obviously since the establishment of the Australian Space Agency. And I'm just going to flick through a couple of them. This first one, obviously, is from the University of New South Wales newsroom. And what I found was really interesting about this was Andrew Debs, who is the head there at AXA, really brings home the point and says that it's until now, if you wanted to become an astronaut, you really had the odds stacked against you. You had to become a citizen of another country, like the US, and then work hard to get into an agency like NASA. And this won't be the case for too much longer, because the thing is, we really only maybe a short period of time before we have to wait to actually have our own astronaut. So this really does open the door, especially with having an agency where we may have relationships with NASA or the European Space Agency, and be able to have cooperative arrangements that will allow us to potentially get an astronaut on board one of the missions that could come up. Now, remember, the International Space Station is something that I really like to talk to my students about, because it's been up their whole lifetimes. So when I talk to high school kids now, I say, I'm teaching high school, so I say, guess what? There's not been a day in your life that there's not been someone in space. Someone has been in orbit that entire time. And that wasn't the case for many of us in the room growing up. So I think we've become very accustomed to that just being normal. But obviously the International Space Station may not be there forever. It has a limited lifetime. It may be that they successfully commercialise its operation, but it may or may not pass. So I certainly hope that as far as having that ability to potentially go and get trained and actually have missions to actually do, that there will be opportunities. But as far as that's concerned, even just this morning I heard that there was news from Russia talking with India and wanting them to become part of an arrangement where they actually develop the capability to have more missions together in terms of human spaceflight. So even just this morning and finding out news like that, it really shows you that agencies are now actively talking with other agencies and trying to do things collaboratively. So in order to become an astronaut, there's obviously a very long process that's involved, and I probably may not have time to necessarily go through all of it. But suffice to say, if you have an engineering or science or maths background, for at least a 4-year degree, and you have at least a few years' experience in that field, plus it's also viewed very positively if you have experience in a jet, then you have potentially the opportunity to at least apply for the Corps. again here, I want to sort of emphasise the point that it's really important that we do give our Australians the chance to aspire to become astronauts without forcing them to join and go to another country. So this person here that I'm quoting from, Maria, she's actually a test pilot. I met Pamela Milroy recently and spoke with her, and it turns out that Maria actually presented with her last year, I believe it was, something called Astronaut Stories. Now Maria is a test pilot, just like Pam Milroy is a test pilot. Maria is an Australian pilot. She's in the Royal Australian Air Force. She came third in her class as far as test pilots. We're talking about test pilot school for the US Air Force in the States. So she's actually one of the best test pilots. She also has a first class honours degree. And traditionally, she would be a fantastic candidate to become an astronaut. Another person that I went to university with in 2007 called an individual called John Cherry, is similarly an astrophysics graduate, went and did teaching, went and became a commercial pilot, and so forth. And there are a lot of people like this that actively go and decide to go through this process, and then they end up moving overseas, including Michelle Hill from the University of Queensland, a very promising honours student that just got a first class honours degree from USQ, is now over in California, really chasing her dream. Remember, before she went into her degree, she was actually a pilot as well. So this is something that I want to be able to give an opportunity for these three people, but there's lots of people out there. I want to give them a chance to aspire to become astronauts. Again, this is another one just showing how it engages kids. Kids get really excited talking about they're talking to astronauts. This is an astronaut here, Marsha Evans, and she was talking to this 11-year-old. You can see just how excited this person is about becoming an astronaut or wanting to become an astronaut. And I guess the point is that we are bringing NASA astronauts over to Australia fairly regularly to talk to our kids about becoming astronauts, or talking to them and engaging with them. But what better way to engage our kids than actually having Australians? So I guess this section here, I'd like to just mention the feedback that I've received from Dr. Paul Scully-Power and from Andy Thomas. I spoke with Paul Scully-Power, and he said that the model on establishing Australian Astronaut Corps would be Canada. The Canadian Space Agency's agreement with NASA to provide Canadian astronauts to NASA. There have been 12 astronauts, by the way, from Canada. With the establishment of the Australian Space Agency, we're in the first time in a great position to do a similar agreement with NASA. That said, it would take government money to support such an initiative. And you also have to make the argument as to how it would be in the national interest. Then he goes on to say this is where Space 2.0 comes in, which of course Adam Gilmore spoke about earlier today. It's just using space sense to prove the life down here on Earth, whether that be agriculture, mining, transportation, etc. And this is really a way that Australia can get in and actually promote our worthiness, if you like, in our region, to be able to be part of something that's perhaps larger than us in our region. And then I got a really interesting email back from Andy Thomas, and he said, thanks for your email. The question of establishing an Australian astronaut corps is politically sensitive. Australia is a country that only just has established an agency after decades after similar developments in the OECD countries. And while the concept of astronauts may stimulate STEM activities, it comes at a cost that many find unjustifiable. So establishing an astronaut corps would be a tough sell right now. You may be interested to know that previous Prime Ministers had been asked to consider flying astronauts, Australian astronauts on the shuttle, but the offer had always been declined as it lacks the political justification or a compelling reason. I've even tried to promote the idea at the Prime Ministerial level, but without success. I don't see that as having changed. However, change can come in time, but only comes in small steps. I suggest a better first step would be for Australian research institutions to collaborate in the NASA or ESA human spaceflight programs through joint science collaboration, possibly develop instruments to fly on the ISS, or the proposed Lunar Gateway. This will open other opportunities down the road, and you never know where that might lead. And with the advent of commercial human flights, there may be opportunities by Australian organisations to purchase seats without committing to the political and economic cost of a national astronaut corps. We'd encourage you to pursue that line of reasoning in your talk. So, as you can see, it's two quite different responses from both of Australia's astronauts. But it's really important that we recognise, obviously, Andy Thomas is saying that we really need to make sure that we can get behind and justify why. So, just really quite briefly, I guess I wanted to encapsulate perhaps what I see as being the key points in why we should have an Australian astronaut corps, and I encapsulate those here. So, I've already sort of spoken about reversing the brain drain. I've mentioned 3 individuals that I know of that would be definitely fantastic astronaut candidates. We've already had talks on boosting STEM, and I don't really need to talk too much further on that. But again, I guess this is engaging with our partners. What I'm referring to there is I'm talking about within the Asia Pacific region. And it's really important that we are seeing, now that we have an agency, to step forward and actually have a leadership role in our region. I also want to emphasise the science, because I'm certainly not saying that we should take money off any of the other fantastic areas that have been mentioned during the conference. I would really like this to be something that we add on rather than being seen as being potentially something that would take money away. So, just regarding valuable STEM research in orbit, you only have to see that we have a STEM on Station program happening at the moment. There's 2 astronauts that are actually giving science lessons from space. Now, if NASA didn't see it as being worthwhile to send teachers to space, then they wouldn't have sent them. So they know. The argument that STEM is boosted by astronauts in space is there, because they've actually put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and have put astronauts in space for that reason, to boost STEM. And then I mentioned there's a couple of things with regards to Lunar Village, asteroids, Mars and beyond. And I guess what this says is that we need to step up and take our mining expertise in Australia to the next level. So this is a nice quick pic from an analogue that was actually kindly given to me by Jonathan Clark here from a couple of years ago. And I mention this because obviously we've had some great talks on rovers, but nothing's going to beat boots on the ground, boots on the surface, as far as being able to get our geoscientists covering and doing the science. Now, AI can certainly go a long way, but I think that the benefit in having trained astronauts in space is certainly going to, especially once we start to explore our solar system, I don't think anything is ever going to quite substitute for the expertise of geoscientists on other planets. And again here, the joint science collaboration is the key with NASA, ESA, with France that we have an agreement with, Japan, Canadian Space Agency, and also obviously the United Kingdom, who have astronauts, Tim Peake that's become an astronaut, and the organisation I'm referring to there is the Asia Pacific group of countries that have agencies. And I guess from here, I'd really like to work out a feasible timeline to eventually have someone in space. Talking of NASA collaboration, I couldn't help but throw in a slide from the University of Southern Queensland. Yesterday's talk by Professor Jonty Horner was talking about Minerva Australis and how we're already at USQ partnering with NASA and doing follow-up studies of exoplanet candidates. But there's so much more that universities are doing as well. Just this morning we heard the talk with regards to Mars and what the universities are doing in that regard. So thank you very much for your time. I do welcome probably a couple of questions if you have time, otherwise I'm keeping you from your lunch.
We might thank James for his talk.